Oddish is one of those Pokemon that feels like it has always been part of the world, even for people who haven't played every game. It's small, round, and simple, with a blue body and a cluster of green leaves growing out of the top of its head. It looks like a walking plant bulb, and in a way, that's exactly what it is. Oddish is classified as the weed Pokemon, a name that sounds almost too ordinary for something that becomes part of one of the most famous evolution lines in the series. But the more you look at Oddish, the more you realize how much thought was packed into this tiny creature, especially when it comes to its biology, its inspirations, and the strange way it behaves depending on whether it's day or night. Oddish first appeared in Generation 1 in Pokemon Red and Blue as part of the original 151 Pokemon. That alone gives it a certain kind of historical weight. In the earliest days of Pokemon, the designers were still establishing what the world even was. They were experimenting with what counted as a monster, what counted as an animal, what counted as a plant, and what counted as something in between. Oddish was part of the early proof that Pokemon didn't need to be fierce or intimidating to feel real. It could be cute, quiet, and small, and still have a role in battles and in the ecosystem of the region. Oddish is a dual-type Pokemon, grass and poison. That combination might seem strange at first, but it actually makes a lot of sense when you remember that many real-world plants defend themselves with toxins. In Pokemon, grass type doesn't automatically mean safe or gentle. It often means natural, and nature includes things that sting, irritate, and poison. Oddish's poison typing connects it to a whole group of plant Pokemon from Kanto that share the same idea, including Bellsprout and its evolutions. It's a reminder that even something that looks harmless can have defensive properties built into it. One of Oddish's most memorable traits is that it behaves differently depending on the time of day. In its Pokédex entries across multiple generations, Oddish is consistently described as a nocturnal Pokemon. It spends the daytime buried underground, leaving only its leaves visible above the surface. This is one of those details that feels small, but it gives Oddish a strangely realistic lifestyle. You can picture a field where Oddish are hidden just below the soil, quietly waiting out the sunlight, conserving moisture and avoiding predators. Then, when night falls, they emerge to move around and spread their seeds. The Pokédex often emphasizes that Oddish prefers moonlit nights and that it travels surprisingly far under the cover of darkness. Oddish's leaves are also described as having a very distinct smell, and this smell is one of its defining biological traits. Some Pokédex entries mention that the leaves release a sweet scent, while others emphasize that the smell can be unpleasant or powerful depending on the situation. This ties Oddish to real plants that release strong odors as part of their survival strategy, whether to attract pollinators, repel threats, or communicate chemically with the environment. In the Pokemon world, smell is often used as a subtle detail to make plant Pokemon feel more alive, and Oddish is one of the earliest examples of that. Oddish's evolution line is also notable because it branches. Oddish evolves into Gloom, and from there, it can evolve into either Vileplume or Bellossom, depending on the method used. In the original Generation 1 games, Oddish's line ended at Vileplume. Bellossom didn't exist yet, because it was introduced later in Generation 2. That means Oddish is part of an evolution family that literally expanded over time as the franchise grew. When Gold and Silver introduced Bellossom, it retroactively gave Gloom a second possible future, and that made Oddish's line feel more like a living species that could develop in different ways rather than a fixed ladder. The method for these evolutions is also interesting because it relies on evolution stones. Gloom evolves into Vileplume using a leaf stone, and into Bellisum using a sunstone. The leaf stone is one of the classic Kanto evolution stones, tied to nature and plant energy. The sunstone, introduced in Johto, feels more specialized, more symbolic, and it connects Bellisum to sunlight and warmth. That means the same Pokemon, Gloom, can become two different final evolutions, depending on whether you push it toward a more classic plant fungus form or towards something more floral and sunlit. Oddish itself has also been version exclusive at different times, which is a fun piece of trivia that goes all the way back to the beginning. In Pokemon Red and Blue, Oddish is found in Pokemon Blue, while Bellsprout is found in Pokemon Red. This was one of the earliest examples of how the series encouraged trading. If you wanted both Oddish and Bellsprout in the same Pokedex, you needed to trade with someone who had the other version. This kind of design choice shaped how Pokemon was played socially, turning certain Pokemon into little markers of which version you owned. Oddish's design seems simple, but it has multiple layers of inspiration. The most obvious connection is to a plant bulb or root vegetable, especially something like an onion. The name Oddish itself sounds like a playful combination of odd and radish, which fits the way Pokemon names often blend real-world concepts with quirky language. Oddish's Japanese name, Nazonokusa, translates to something like mysterious grass, which fits its nocturnal behavior and its slightly strange appearance. Even from the start, Oddish was meant to feel like a small mystery hiding in the grass at night. Oddish's line is also strongly connected to real-world flowers. Vileplume, its original final evolution, is based heavily on the Rafflesia, a real flower famous for being extremely large and for producing a strong odor, often compared to rotting meat. That detail makes Vileplume one of the most biologically grounded Pokemon in the original games. Even though Oddish is cute, its final evolution is tied to something in nature that is both impressive and unsettling. That connection makes Oddish feel like a seed of something much stranger, like the harmless-looking beginning of a plant that becomes almost alien in its full bloom. Oddish has also been used in the Pokemon anime in ways that emphasize its behavior. It's often shown as shy, skittish, or easily startled, which fits the idea of a creature that hides underground during the day. In some appearances, Oddish reacts dramatically when exposed, flailing its leaves and panicking, which adds humor, but also reinforces the idea that it's not meant to be out in the open for long. The anime tends to exaggerate Pokemon traits for comedy, but Oddish's core identity stays consistent. It's a small plant Pokemon that would rather stay hidden. In terms of battle mechanics, Oddish has traditionally been a Pokemon that learns status, moves, and draining attacks, fitting the idea of a plant that weakens opponents over time. Moves like Absorb and Mega Drain appear naturally in its learn set across many generations, emphasizing slow recovery and endurance rather than explosive power. Oddish isn't typically a Pokemon that sweeps teams with raw damage. It's the kind that slowly wins through attrition, healing itself while wearing down the opponent, which fits its quiet, persistent nature. Oddish is also part of an important early game experience for many players, especially in Kanto remakes. It often appears in grassy routes near the middle of the early journey, offering players access to grass-type coverage if they didn't choose Bulbasaur as a starter. This matters because water-type Pokemon appear frequently in the early and mid-game, and having a grass-type move can make battles much easier. Oddish becomes a practical tool, but also a companion that can stay with you for a long time if you choose to invest in it. Oddish's typing also creates interesting weaknesses and resistances that reflect its identity. As a grass and poison type, Oddish resists water, electric, grass, fighting, and fairy in later generations, but it's weak to fire, ice, flying, and psychic. Those weaknesses make sense thematically. Fire burns plants, ice freezes them. Flying types represent birds that might snatch small creatures from the ground. Psychic types often dominate poison types in the early games, which is why Pokemon like Alakazam and Mewtwo felt so overwhelming in Generation 1. Oddish's strengths and weaknesses tell a story of a creature that thrives quietly in the right conditions, but struggles when exposed to harsh environments. Oddish has also appeared in the Pokemon trading card game for decades, often as a basic Pokemon that evolves into Gloom and then into its final forms. In the TCG, Oddish cards frequently emphasize small amounts of damage, status effects, or simple setup moves, reflecting its role as an early-stage Pokemon. Even outside the video games, Oddish maintains that identity as something that starts small and grows into something more significant. In Pokemon Go, Oddish became familiar to a whole new generation of players as a common wild spawn, especially in grassy areas. In that game, its evolution line is also split, and Blossom requires a Sunstone along with Candy, which mirrors the main series' evolution method. Pokemon Go's day and night system and weather influences also make Oddish feel like it belongs in the real world, appearing more naturally in certain conditions, reinforcing its identity as a nocturnal plant creature. Oddish also has one of those evolution lines that subtly reflects mood. Oddish itself looks neutral, almost blank, with its wide red eyes. Gloom looks tired, droopy, and sleepy, with a constant drip from its mouth that's often described as honey-like or nectar-like in the Pokédex. Vileplume looks like a heavy, looming flower creature, while Bellossom looks cheerful and bright. The line moves through different emotional vibes, almost like different interpretations of what a plant Pokemon can become. It's one of those evolution families where the personality seems to evolve alongside the body. One of the most obscure but interesting things about Oddish is how it represents the early design philosophy of Pokemon. The original games didn't have huge lore dumps. They didn't have cinematic storytelling. Most of what you learned came from tiny Pokédex entries and small bits of NPC dialogue. Oddish is a perfect example of that approach. It looks simple, but the Pokédex turns it into something real, something with habits, preferences, and a lifestyle. It's not just a battle sprite. It's a creature that hides underground in the day, wanders at night, spreads seeds, and releases scents from its leaves. And that's why Oddish remains memorable even after so many generations. It isn't a legendary Pokemon. It isn't a champion's ace. It isn't even particularly rare. But it's part of the foundation of Pokemon's world building, a small plant creature that makes the tall grass feel alive. It's the kind of Pokemon you can imagine stumbling across on a quiet night, seeing only a few leaves sticking out of the soil, then watching as the little blue body rises from the ground and blinks at you in the moonlight, ready to wander off into the darkness again as if it was never meant to be seen. And in a world filled with dragons, ghosts, and gods, there's something strangely comforting about that. Arbok is one of those Pokemon that feels instantly recognizable, even if you haven't thought about it in years. A tall purple cobra with an intimidating hood pattern, Arbok looks like it was designed to make you pause the first time you see it. It isn't cute, it isn't friendly, and it doesn't try to be. Arbok's entire design communicates one idea very clearly: stay back. But what makes Arbok interesting isn't just that it looks dangerous. It's that the series has quietly given it a surprisingly deep set of details over the years. From regional design changes and strange Pokédex behavior to its connection with Team Rocket and the way its hood pattern has become one of the most unique visual traits of any Pokemon. Arbok first appeared in Generation 1, evolving from Ekans starting at level 22. That simple evolution is part of the classic early Pokemon structure. You find a basic snake Pokemon, train it, and eventually it becomes something much more threatening. In the original games, Ekans was version exclusive to Pokemon Red, while Sandshrew was version exclusive to Pokemon Blue, making Arbok part of that original trading ecosystem that encouraged players to connect with others to complete the Pokédex. That small detail ties Arbok to the earliest social design of Pokemon, where owning one version meant you naturally had access to Pokemon that someone else didn't. Arbok is a pure poison-type Pokemon, which is fitting because in Generation 1, poison types were everywhere. They were common in caves, on routes, and especially in the teams of Team Rocket. Poison in early Pokemon wasn't just an elemental typing, it was a theme. It represented danger that lingered. It wasn't about a single big hit, it was about wearing you down, slowly, over time. Arbok embodies that idea perfectly. It's not the kind of Pokemon that feels like it attacks once and ends the battle. It feels like it traps you, constricts you, and makes it hard to escape. One of the most famous things about Arbok is its name, because it's one of the clearest examples of early Pokemon naming simplicity. Arbok is literally cobra spelled backwards, and Ekans is snake spelled backwards. This is the kind of playful word trick that feels very Gen 1, when Pokemon names were often built from simple ideas, puns, and reversed words. It's charming in a way that only the early games can be. It's like the developers were smiling as they named them, not trying to hide the joke, just letting it exist as part of the world. But despite the simplicity of its name, Arbok's design contains a detail that became more and more interesting as the franchise continued: the pattern on its hood. In the earliest sprite art, Arbok's hood has a face-like marking that looks almost like a scary mask staring back at you. This isn't just a random decoration. The Pokédex has repeatedly stated that the pattern on Arbok's hood can vary depending on the region it lives in, and that it uses this pattern to intimidate enemies. That's a surprisingly specific biological detail. It suggests that Arbok isn't just a snake with a scary marking. It's a species that evolved different hood patterns in different environments, possibly to mimic different predators or to adapt to different threats. In real-world snakes, hood patterns and markings are often used to startle or confuse predators, and Arbok takes that concept and turns it into a signature trait. The anime made this even more explicit. In the Pokemon anime, Arbok's hood pattern is sometimes shown changing, or at least being emphasized as something it can display deliberately. It spreads its hood wide, showing off the marking like a warning sign. That visual moment is one of the reasons Arbok became so iconic as a Team Rocket Pokemon. Jesse's Arbok in particular was one of the most recognizable recurring Pokemon in the entire anime, alongside James's Weezing. For years, Arbok was basically the symbol of Team Rocket's mid-era strength. Not a legendary Pokemon, not a champion's ace, but a consistent, dangerous partner that made Team Rocket feel like a real threat rather than just comic relief. Arbok's Pokédex entries also lean heavily into its intimidation and hunting style. It's often described as being able to constrict with enough force to crush a steel drum, which is a classic example of Pokemon exaggeration used to communicate raw power. Even though Arbok isn't a pseudo-legendary or anything close to that in stats, the Pokédex treats it like something that should be feared if you encounter it in the wild. Some entries mention that once Arbok wraps around prey, there's almost no escape. Others describe it as having a terrifying stare that can paralyze opponents with fear. The idea is consistent. Arbok isn't fast like a bird Pokemon, and it isn't flashy like a fire type, but it's patient, persistent, and lethal up close. One of the more obscure facts about Arbok is that it has had access to moves that feel almost unfair in certain generations, especially when you think about competitive play. Glare, for example, is a move that paralyzes the opponent, and it's notable because it can hit even ground-type Pokemon, unlike electric-type paralysis moves like Thunder Wave. That makes Glare a very valuable status move in battle formats where speed control matters. Arbok also gets access to moves like Wrap, which in the early games could be extremely oppressive due to how binding moves worked in Generation 1. In those games, moves like Wrap could prevent the opponent from acting while damage ticked away, creating a kind of helpless loop if you got caught in it. That mechanic made Pokemon like Arbok feel much more threatening than their raw stats might suggest. Arbok has also had a long relationship with the move Poison Fang in later generations, which can badly poison the target. Bad poison, the kind that ramps up damage each turn, is one of the most dangerous status effects in the game, and it fits Arbok's identity perfectly. When Arbok uses Poison Fang, it's not just doing damage, it's setting a timer. It's forcing the opponent to deal with the fact that the battle is now slipping away from them unless they act quickly. In terms of stats and design role, Arbok has often been treated as a Pokemon with a solid attack stat and a focus on physical moves, especially in generations where poison-type physical attacks became more relevant. Before the physical special split introduced in Generation 4, poison moves were categorized differently, but after the split, Arbok's physical approach became more coherent. It could lean into moves like Gunk Shot, a powerful physical poison-type attack, and suddenly it felt like its venomous identity had a stronger mechanical foundation. Arbok also has a surprisingly interesting relationship with abilities. In later generations, Arbok has had access to abilities like Intimidate, which lowers the opponent's attack when Arbok enters battle. That ability fits Arbok's theme of fear and dominance. It's not just physically threatening, it's psychologically threatening. The moment it arrives, it changes the opponent's confidence, even in mechanical terms. Arbok has also had Shed Skin, an ability that can cure status conditions naturally, reflecting the real-world behavior of snakes shedding their skin and renewing themselves. Then there's Arbok's hidden ability, Unnerve, which prevents opponents from eating berries. That might seem random at first, but it fits the idea of Arbok being so intimidating that it disrupts the opponent's ability to react or recover. It's a subtle ability, but in certain battle formats, it matters. It turns off common healing or defensive berry strategies, making Arbok feel like a predator that doesn't allow easy escapes. Arbok's presence across the regions also shows how Pokemon treats certain creatures as worldwide species. Unlike some Pokemon that only appear in one region's ecosystem, Arbok and Ekans have appeared in many regions over the years, sometimes in wild areas, sometimes as trainer Pokemon, sometimes in side content. That reinforces the idea that snakes are a common part of the Pokemon world's natural environment, and Arbok is one of the franchise's definitive snake Pokemon. In Pokemon Go, Arbok has also had a quiet kind of popularity, not because it dominates the meta, but because it's familiar and easy to recognize. Ekans appears in many places, and evolving into Arbok is straightforward, making it a Pokemon many players have early on. In that game, Arbok's moves and typing make it a niche pick in certain battles, especially when it can apply poison pressure and disrupt opponents. It's not usually a top-tier monster, but it's one of those Pokemon that can surprise people who underestimate it. Arbok also has a strange little place in Pokemon history because of how its hood pattern has been treated almost like a regional variant, long before regional variants officially existed. The idea that Arbok's hood markings differ by region is basically an early example of Pokemon acknowledging that species can look different depending on where they live. Today, we have Alolan forms, Galarian forms, Hisuian forms, and Paldean forms. But Arbok had a concept like that in its lore long before those systems were formalized. It's one of those little details that makes you realize the franchise was thinking about biological variation early on, even if the games didn't have the technology or design space to fully represent it. There's also something interesting about Arbok's relationship with fear as a theme. Many Pokemon are dangerous, but Arbok's danger is built around intimidation. It doesn't just poison you, it scares you. It uses its hood pattern like a mask. It stares, it constricts, it creates pressure that makes it feel like a predator in a way that some other poison types don't. Grimer and Muck feel like environmental hazards. Wheezing feels like pollution. Arbok feels like an animal that evolved specifically to hunt and dominate. And yet, despite all of this, Arbok isn't portrayed as evil by default. It's often associated with villains because Team Rocket used it so heavily. But Arbok itself is just a Pokemon doing what it was designed to do. It survives, it defends itself, it hunts. In the wild, it would be a creature you respect and avoid, not because it's malicious, but because it's effective. When you look at Arbok that way, it becomes a perfect example of Pokemon's early world-building style, a simple design that communicates a clear idea, backed by Pokédex details that make it feel like a real species. A snake that uses intimidation to survive. A hood pattern that changes by region. A body built for constriction. Venom that doesn't just hurt, but lingers. And when you picture it at night, sliding through tall grass, hood folded down, almost invisible in the dark, you can understand why trainers in the Pokemon world might feel their heart rate spike when they hear that familiar hiss. Because Arbok isn't just a snake, it's the warning sign that something dangerous is close enough to strike. If you've ever looked at Kingdra and thought it feels like a Pokemon from a completely different world, you're not imagining it. Kingdra has this calm, almost mythical presence, like something you'd see carved into the side of an ancient ship or painted onto the wall of a seaside temple. It isn't loud or flashy, and it doesn't really try to look cute either. Instead, it looks elegant and powerful in a quiet way, like the ocean itself when it's perfectly still, right before it decides to become a storm. Kingdra is a water and dragon type Pokemon, and that typing alone makes it stand out immediately. For a long time in the Pokemon series, dragon types were treated as rare and special, often reserved for late-game encounters or powerful trainers. In the earlier generations, simply having the dragon type attached to a Pokemon made it feel important. Kingdra was introduced in Generation 2 in Pokemon Gold and Silver, and it was one of the earliest examples of a dragon-type Pokemon that wasn't built around the classic dragon look. It doesn't have wings, claws, or fire. It's based on a seahorse, and somehow that makes it feel even more mysterious. Like the dragon type isn't just about looking like a dragon, but about being connected to something ancient and powerful in nature. Kingdra evolves from Seadra, but the way it evolves is one of its most interesting traits. Unlike many Pokemon that evolve simply by leveling up, Kingdra requires trading while holding a specific item, the Dragon Scale. That's an evolution method that immediately makes Kingdra feel rarer than it actually is. Even if you have a Seadra, you can't just train it into Kingdra on your own in most traditional playthroughs. You need the right item, and you need to trade it, which means you need another person, another system, another step outside the single-player world. That evolution method also has a strange thematic beauty to it. Seadra is already a strong water type with a sharp, spiky design, but Kingdra feels like Seadra's complete form, the version that fully embraces the ocean's mythic side. The dragon scale almost sounds like something you'd find in a sunken ruin, a relic tied to old sea legends. It's one of those items that feels like it belongs in folklore, and using it to evolve a seahorse Pokemon into a water dragon creature makes Kingdra feel like the result of something ancient awakening. Kingdra's design inspiration comes from a combination of real-world sea creatures and classic mythology. The most obvious influence is the seahorse, but Kingdra also resembles the leafy sea dragon, a real marine animal known for its elaborate, drifting fins that make it look like underwater seaweed. That influence is important because leafy sea dragons are famous for blending into their environment, drifting through the water like living camouflage. Kingdra doesn't have the same leafy decorations, but it has a similar sense of being an ocean creature that feels almost unreal, like it's part of the scenery until it suddenly moves. The dragon element in Kingdra's identity is also tied to the concept of sea dragons in mythology. Across different cultures, the ocean is often associated with dragons, serpents, and massive creatures that live beneath the waves. Kingdra fits that archetype perfectly. It's not a dragon of the sky, it's a dragon of the sea. And the Pokemon world treats it that way, describing it in Pokédex entries as a creature that can summon whirlpools and storms, and that lives deep underwater where humans rarely go. One of Kingdra's most famous Pokédex themes is its connection to ocean currents and whirlpools. Multiple entries describe Kingdra as sleeping on the seafloor, and when it wakes, it creates massive whirlpools that can drag ships down. That's an unusually intense description for a Pokemon that looks so composed. It's like the Pokédex is reminding you that the ocean can look calm and harmless until it suddenly becomes deadly. Kingdra embodies that exact contrast. Its face looks steady and almost emotionless, but its power is described as overwhelming. There's also a recurring detail in Kingdra's Pokédex lore about storms. Some entries claim that when Kingdra is seen near the surface, it's a sign that a storm is approaching. This is a real-world concept too, where changes in animal behavior can sometimes signal shifts in weather. In Kingdra's case, it's treated almost like a supernatural omen. Like sailors in the Pokemon world might tell stories about spotting Kingdra and immediately knowing they need to head back to shore because the sea is about to turn violent. Kingdra's typing gives it one of the most interesting defensive profiles in the series, especially in earlier generations. For a long time, Water Dragon was an extremely strong combination because it removed many of water's traditional weaknesses. Water types are normally weak to electric and grass, but Dragon resists both of those types. That means Kingdra doesn't fear the common counters that most water Pokemon have to worry about. Instead, its main weakness is Dragon-type moves and later Fairy-type moves once Fairy was introduced. In generations before Fairy existed, Kingdra's only weakness was Dragon. That made it famously hard to counter in certain formats, because Dragon-type attacks were rare, and not many Pokemon carried them casually. In competitive history, Kingdra has often been associated with rain teams. This is partly because water types naturally benefit from rain, but Kingdra's speed and power can become especially dangerous under rain conditions. One of the most important abilities Kingdra can have is Swift Swim, which doubles its speed stat in rain. That ability turns Kingdra into a completely different kind of threat. Without rain, Kingdra is solid and balanced. With rain, it becomes fast enough to outrun many opponents and hit them with strong water-type moves, boosted by the weather. It's one of those Pokemon that feels calm until the conditions are right, and then suddenly it becomes a storm. Kingdra can also have the ability Sniper, which increases the damage of critical hits. That ability fits Kingdra's theme in a different way. Instead of representing speed and overwhelming waves, Sniper represents precision, a sea creature striking at exactly the right moment, hitting a weak point, and dealing far more damage than expected. Kingdra's entire design has that vibe, like it's not wasteful. It doesn't thrash around wildly. It moves with control. Another obscure but interesting fact about Kingdra is how its evolution line ties into the broader world of Johto and its connection to dragons. Johto is the region that introduced dragon-type lore more heavily, with places like the Dragon's Den and trainers who treat dragons as sacred or legendary. Kingdra is a dragon type, but it's not part of that land-based dragon culture. It's a reminder that dragons in Pokemon aren't only found in caves and mountains. They can exist in the ocean too, hidden far below the surface, living in a world most trainers never see. Kingdra's relationship with the move Dragon Breath is also notable historically. In earlier generations, dragon-type moves were limited, and Dragon Breath was one of the most accessible options. It wasn't the strongest dragon move, but it had a chance to paralyze, giving it utility. Kingdra being able to use dragon-type attacks alongside water-type attacks made it feel versatile, like it could pressure many different kinds of opponents without needing complicated setup. Kingdra has also been associated with the move Hydro Pump, one of the most powerful water-type attacks in the game. Hydro Pump is often described as blasting water at extremely high pressure, and it fits Kingdra's stormy ocean identity perfectly. When Kingdra uses Hydro Pump, it feels like the sea itself is firing a cannon. It's one of those moves that, even if it misses sometimes, carries a certain drama and weight to it. In the Pokemon anime, Kingdra has often been portrayed as a serious and powerful Pokemon, usually belonging to strong trainers. It's not the kind of Pokemon that appears casually. When it shows up, it often signals a higher level of battle. That's consistent with how it's treated in the games too. You don't just stumble into a Kingdra early on. You work for it. You evolve it through a trade. You find the dragon scale. You commit to it. Kingdra has also appeared in Pokemon contests and side content where its elegant design shines. It's not just a battle Pokemon. Its smooth curves, its curled tail, and its flowing fins make it visually striking in a way that feels graceful rather than aggressive. It's like the Pokemon equivalent of a sea creature you'd see in a museum display, beautiful and ancient at the same time. One of the more subtle details about Kingdra is that it is based on a male pregnant species in real life. Seahorses are famous because, unlike most animals, male seahorses carry the babies. In the Pokemon world, this is reflected in the Horsey and Seadra line through breeding mechanics, where either gender can produce eggs depending on the breeding pair, but the inspiration is still there. It's one of those quiet facts that adds depth to the line because it ties Kingdra's evolution family to one of the strangest and most fascinating reproductive strategies in nature. Kingdra's name also has interesting origins. In English, it's a combination of king and dra, with dra likely referencing dragon. It's a simple name, but it carries a feeling of authority, like this is the ruler of a hidden ocean kingdom. Its Japanese name, Kingdra, is very similar, reinforcing that the concept was strong enough that it didn't need heavy localization changes. It was already clear what this Pokemon was meant to be, a sea dragon king. In terms of where Kingdra has been obtainable over the years, it has often been tied to fishing, ocean routes, and late-game exploration. Horsey and Seadra tend to appear in water areas that feel slightly more advanced than the early game ponds. That makes sense, because Kingdra is not a beginner Pokemon. It's a creature you discover when you've already become comfortable with traveling across water, diving into the ocean routes, and exploring places that feel far from the safety of towns. Kingdra's Pokédex category is the Dragon Pokémon, which is interesting because it's one of the few Dragon-type Pokémon that doesn't resemble a traditional dragon. That classification is almost like the Pokédex telling you, this is a dragon, even if you don't recognize it as one. It expands the definition of what a dragon can be in the Pokémon world. Not just a flying beast, but an ocean creature with control over storms. Another obscure detail is that Kingdra's shiny form changes its coloration to a more purplish tone. Shiny Pokémon are always a little mysterious, but Kingdra's shiny in particular feels like it fits its mythic ocean vibe, like a rare deep-sea creature you'd only see once in a lifetime. Kingdra has also had a mega evolution in the franchise's history? No, it has not. That's actually an interesting fact in itself. Many Pokémon that feel powerful or iconic received mega evolutions in Generation 6, but Kingdra never did. It remained as it was, which in a way keeps it consistent. Kingdra doesn't need an extra form to feel special. Its typing, its lore, and its evolution method already give it that legendary adjacent aura. Kingdra's presence in the Pokémon world is like a reminder that the ocean in Pokémon is deeper than it looks. When you surf across the water in the games, it often feels like a simple blue path, but the lore suggests something else. Beneath that surface are creatures like Kingdra, sleeping in the dark, stirring currents, shaping storms, and living in a world untouched by most trainers. It's a Pokémon that feels like it belongs to the hidden parts of the map, the places you only reach when you've gone far enough that land starts to feel distant. And maybe that's why Kingdra has such a calming effect as a Pokémon to think about. It's powerful, but not chaotic. It's dangerous, but not cruel. It's like the ocean itself, vast and quiet, carrying ancient energy beneath the surface, waiting patiently for the moment it chooses to rise. Some Pokémon feel like they were pulled straight out of nature, like a creature you could almost imagine hiding in tall grass or swimming beneath the surface of a lake. Clink is not one of those Pokémon. Clink looks like something that should be sitting inside a machine shop, quietly turning in place, clicking and clacking like a tiny living piece of equipment. It's literally a pair of interlocking gears with eyes, and the first time you see it, it almost feels like a joke. Until you realize the Pokémon world has always had room for strange life forms that blur the line between creature and object. Clink was introduced in Generation 5 in Pokémon Black and White, and it belongs to the Steel type that already tells you a lot about its identity. Steel-type Pokémon are often associated with durability, resistance, and industrial themes, and Clink fits into that perfectly. But unlike Steel Pokémon such as Steelix or Metagross, which feel like massive, intimidating machines, Clink is small and oddly cute in a minimalist way. Its design is clean and simple. 2 gears, one slightly larger than the other, connected together with a single eye on each gear. It doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't have limbs, and it doesn't have an expressive face beyond those eyes. And yet, it feels alive. Clink's Pokédex classification is the Gear Pokémon, which might be one of the most literal category names in the entire franchise. But what's more interesting is how the Pokédex explains its behavior. According to multiple entries, Clink's 2 gears rotate together, and that rotation isn't just for show. The gears are said to be able to change direction depending on how Clink feels, and the way they spin can communicate its mood. Some entries describe that if the gears spin in opposite directions, Clink becomes unstable or angry. It's a strange idea, but also a clever one. In a world where most Pokémon show emotion through facial expressions, Clink shows emotion through motion, like a tiny machine whose internal rhythm reflects its feelings. Clink is also part of a three-stage evolution line, which is unusual for a Pokemon that looks like an object. It evolves into Clang at level 38, and then into Klinklang at level 49. That evolution line is one of the most straightforward in Generation 5 because it's purely level-based and doesn't require items, trades, or friendship. The simplicity of its evolution method is almost funny when you think about it. Clink doesn't need a special stone or a special location to evolve. It just keeps turning, keeps existing, keeps leveling up, and eventually it becomes more complex, like a machine gradually assembling itself into a larger system. Each evolution adds more gears, more structure, and more mechanical complexity. Clink becomes Clang by adding a third gear, and Klinklang adds even more components, including a red central gear and a more elaborate arrangement. The line is a perfect example of Pokemon evolution as a visual metaphor. Clink starts as a simple mechanism, and it evolves into something more advanced, like it's upgrading itself over time. It's one of the clearest examples of more parts equals stronger in Pokemon design. One obscure but genuinely interesting fact about Clink is that it is genderless. Many Pokemon are genderless, especially those that are artificial or mechanical, like Magnemite or Porygon. Clink fits into that group, reinforcing the idea that it isn't a biological animal in the traditional sense. It's a life form, but not one defined by natural reproduction the way most Pokemon are. Instead, it's treated like something that exists as part of a mechanical ecosystem, possibly created by human industry or formed naturally in industrial environments in the Pokemon world. Clink's abilities are also very fitting for its theme. One of its main abilities is Plus, and another is Minus. These abilities are typically associated with Pokemon that work well in pairs, boosting each other in double battles. Plus and Minus are famously tied to Pokemon like Plusle and Minoon, which are based on electrical charges. For Clink, the same abilities make sense in a different way. Gears are meant to work together. A single gear spinning alone doesn't accomplish much, but gears connected in a system can transfer power, create motion, and perform work. Clink's abilities reflect that idea. It's strongest when it's part of a coordinated system. Clink also has the hidden ability Clear Body, which prevents its stats from being lowered by opponents. That ability is common among steel types and makes sense for Clink thematically. It's a solid piece of machinery. It doesn't get weakened easily. It's a small detail, but it adds to the feeling that Clink is stable and resistant, like a little engine that refuses to be disrupted. Clink's signature move is Gear Grind, a steel-type attack introduced in Generation 5. Gear Grind is notable because it hits twice, and it's one of the moves that makes Clink's evolution line feel more unique in battle. A gear-themed Pokemon having a move that literally grinds into the opponent is both fitting and slightly unsettling because it suggests a kind of mechanical force that isn't usually associated with small, cute creatures. Gear Grind also has decent power and benefits from the fact that it hits twice, which can break through effects like Substitute or Focus Sash in certain situations. Another move strongly associated with Clink and its evolutions is Shift Gear. Shift Gear is a stat-boosting move that raises the user's attack and speed, representing the idea of changing gears to increase performance. It's a move that perfectly matches the concept of a mechanical Pokemon. In competitive play, Shift Gear can be extremely powerful, because boosting speed and attack together can turn a slow, bulky Pokemon into a sudden threat. Clink itself isn't usually the star of that strategy, but Klinklang can use it effectively, making the entire evolution line feel more purposeful. Clink's presence in the Unova region also ties into Generation 5's overall themes. Unova is heavily inspired by urban environments, modern cities, and industrial spaces. Pokemon Black and White feature locations like Castelia City, a massive metropolis, and various routes and facilities that feel more modern than earlier regions. Clink fits into that world perfectly. It feels like a Pokemon that would naturally appear near factories, power plants, or mechanical systems. In fact, in the games, Clink is often found in places like Chargestone Cave or other areas associated with technology and energy, reinforcing its connection to industrial environments. One of the most obscure and fun details about Clink is that its design is sometimes used as an example in debates about object Pokemon. Some fans love object Pokemon, arguing that they add variety and creativity to the world. Others dislike them, feeling they break immersion. Clink is often brought up in these discussions because it's so literally an object. But what makes Clink interesting is that it isn't just a gear. It's a gear system that behaves like a creature. It has instincts, moods, and a life cycle. The Pokédex describes it as something that can spin faster when excited, and that it can create energy through rotation. That makes it feel less like a random object and more like a mechanical organism. Clink's shiny form is another small detail that fans enjoy. Shiny Clink has a slightly different coloration, shifting its metallic tones. It's subtle, but that subtlety fits the Pokemon. A shiny gear Pokemon wouldn't necessarily look wildly different. It would look like a slightly different metal alloy, like a rare variation of the same mechanism. Clink's role in the Pokemon world is also interesting because it implies that mechanical life exists naturally. In the Pokemon universe, steel types aren't always created by humans. Some are ancient, like Bronzong, while others feel like they emerged from industrialization, like Clink. The fact that Clink exists at all suggests that as humans build machines, Pokemon adapt, evolve, and appear in those environments. It's like the Pokemon world responds to human development by creating new species that fit into the changing ecosystem. Clink also has a unique relationship with sound. In the games and anime, gear Pokemon are often associated with clicking, grinding, and mechanical noises. Clink's very existence implies a constant quiet sound, like a tiny clockwork device turning. That makes it oddly perfect for a sleep fact script, because you can almost imagine Clink as a calming background noise in a workshop at night. A steady, repetitive motion, a consistent rhythm, like a living metronome. In terms of battle stats, Clink is not particularly strong on its own, and that's part of what makes it feel realistic. It's a basic form. It's not meant to dominate. Its stats are balanced toward defense, reflecting Steel's durability, but it lacks the raw power of bigger Steel types. As it evolves, it becomes more specialized, gaining better stats and access to stronger moves. This progression mirrors the idea of a machine being upgraded over time. Clink is like a prototype. Klinklang is the finished product. One of the more obscure details about Clink's evolution line is that despite being made of gears, it cannot learn the move Earthquake naturally, which some players find surprising. Many Steel types learn Ground-type moves to represent heavy impacts or industrial force, but Clink's move pool is more focused on Steel and support moves. That makes it feel more like a specialized machine rather than a brute force monster. It's about rotation, grinding, and shifting gears, not smashing the ground. Clink also has an interesting place in Pokemon merchandise and fan culture because it's one of those Pokemon that looks simple enough to be turned into real objects. People have made Clink-themed keychains, gear decorations, and mechanical art pieces. It's one of the Pokemon that feels like it could exist as a real design in a steampunk world, blending fantasy and machinery in a way that appeals to a certain aesthetic. Another factual detail that's easy to miss is that Clink's eyes are not symmetrical in personality. The larger gear and smaller gear each have an eye. And while the Pokemon is treated as a single creature, the design suggests a kind of dual nature. Some Pokédex entries imply that the gears can rotate independently, and that the way they align affects how Clink behaves. It's almost like Clink is two beings working as one, or like it has two minds that must stay synchronized. Clink's existence also raises a quiet philosophical question about Pokemon. What counts as life? In the Pokemon world, you can have creatures made of rock, magnets, sludge, and literal gears, and they're all alive. They all have consciousness in some form. They can all bond with trainers. Clink is a perfect example of that idea because it challenges the usual definition of a creature. It doesn't have a face in the traditional sense. It doesn't have a heartbeat you can imagine. But it's still a Pokemon, still a living being, still something you can raise and train. And maybe that's the most calming thing about Clink when you think about it late at night. It's a reminder that in the Pokemon world, life is everywhere. In forests, in oceans, in caves, and even inside the quiet hum of machinery. Even something as simple as a pair of gears can become a creature with its own rhythm, its own instincts, its own little place in the world. So when you picture Clink turning slowly in the dark, hidden somewhere in an abandoned factory or a quiet cave filled with humming energy, it doesn't feel strange anymore. It feels like part of the world's natural order. A tiny mechanical life form, spinning endlessly, patiently, like it was built for nothing but motion, and somehow that motion became its soul, quietly slipping through tall grass and moonlit roads like it doesn't want to be noticed. Nickit is one of those Pokemon that feels like it was designed to be seen out of the corner of your eye. It's small, fox-like, and clever-looking, with a reddish-brown coat and darker markings that make it seem naturally suited for sneaking around at night. Nickit was introduced in Generation 8 in Pokemon Sword and Shield, and even though it isn't a legendary Pokemon or a major story mascot, it has a surprisingly rich set of details that make it feel like a real animal living alongside people in the Galar region. Nickit is a dark-type Pokemon, which immediately gives it a certain reputation. In Pokemon, the dark type often gets misunderstood. It isn't necessarily evil, even though early translations sometimes made it feel that way. Dark-type Pokemon are usually themed around trickery, underhanded tactics, sneaking, and survival through cleverness rather than raw strength. Nickit fits that theme perfectly. It isn't portrayed as a brute force predator. Instead, it's portrayed as a thief, a scavenger, and a master of slipping in and out of human spaces without being caught. Nickit's Pokédex classification is the Fox Pokémon, which makes it one of several fox-inspired Pokémon in the franchise, but its role is very different from the others. Vulpix, for example, is mystical and fire-themed. Zorua is illusion-based and mysterious. Fennekin is magical and starter-like. Nickit, on the other hand, feels grounded. It's a fox that behaves like a real fox would in a world where Pokemon and humans share towns and farms. It sneaks into places, steals food, and vanishes before anyone can react. It's less like a fairy tale fox and more like the kind of animal you'd hear rustling near a trash bin at night. One of the most consistent details about Nickit across its Pokédex entries is that it steals food. This is not just a cute personality trait, it's basically the core of its survival strategy. Nickit is described as using its soft paws to silently move around, stealing berries and supplies from people and other Pokemon. The Pokédex emphasizes that Nickit doesn't fight head-on. It doesn't challenge stronger Pokemon directly. It relies on stealth and speed. It's a Pokemon that survives by being smarter, not stronger. That detail becomes even more interesting when you look at Nickit's evolution, Thievul. Nickit evolves into Thievul at level 18, which is fairly early, and that evolution line is clearly themed around foxes becoming more cunning as they mature. Thievel's name is a combination of thief and vulpes, the Latin word for fox. Nicket's name is also a clever word blend, likely combining nick, meaning to steal something, with kit, which is a term for a young fox. That makes Nicket's name unusually perfect. It literally means little thief fox. Nicket's design supports that theme in subtle ways. Its face markings resemble a mask, a common visual shorthand for sneaky or mischievous characters. Its tail is large and fluffy, which is true to real foxes, but in Nicket's case, it also feels like something that could help with balance and quick turns while running away. Its posture looks low and cautious, like it's always ready to dart away. Even the shape of its eyes gives it a slightly sly expression, as if it's always calculating what it can get away with. Nicket is also one of those Pokemon that shows how the dark type can be more playful than sinister. Some dark type Pokemon feel intimidating or aggressive, like Tyranitar or Hydreigon. Nicket feels like a mischievous neighborhood animal. It's the kind of Pokemon that would sneak into a bakery at night, steal a loaf of bread, and then vanish into the fog. It isn't trying to destroy anything, it's just surviving, using whatever it can find. In terms of habitat, Nicket is strongly associated with routes and wild areas in Galar, and it's often encountered early in Pokemon Sword and Shield. That placement makes sense, because Nicket is meant to be an early game dark-type option for players. Its stats and move pool are not designed to dominate late-game battles, but it's useful early on, especially because dark-type moves can help against psychic-type opponents and certain tricky enemies. Nicket's abilities also reinforce its identity. It can have the ability Run Away, which allows it to escape from wild battles without fail. That's one of the most thematically perfect abilities a Pokemon like Nicket could have. It's literally a Pokemon built to avoid conflict and escape danger. It also can have Unburden, which doubles its speed when it loses its held item. That ability fits a thief Pokemon in a clever way. It's like Nicket drops whatever it was carrying and suddenly becomes much faster, sprinting away into the night. Nicket's hidden ability is Stakeout, which is an especially interesting one. Stakeout doubles the damage Nicket deals to a target that has just switched into battle. The idea behind Stakeout is that the Pokemon waits, watches, and strikes at the perfect moment, catching the opponent off guard. That fits a sneaky fox perfectly. It isn't about raw power. It's about timing and opportunity. It's the Pokemon equivalent of waiting in the shadows until the moment is right. Nicket's move pool includes a mix of dark-type attacks and utility moves that match its sneaky nature. Moves like Snarl and Beat Up have appeared in its options, and these moves fit the idea of a Pokemon that fights dirty rather than fighting fair. Even when Nicket battles, it doesn't feel like it's doing honorable duels. It feels like it's distracting, biting, and escaping. It's not the strongest fighter, but it's the kind of Pokemon that can annoy opponents and force mistakes. Nicket's base form doesn't have a signature move in the same way some Pokemon do, but it does gain access to moves that emphasize its identity as a trickster. In later generations, many dark-type Pokemon have access to moves like Thief, which steals the opponent's held item. Nicket being associated with that move feels almost inevitable because its entire lore is about stealing food and supplies. Nicket's existence also ties into one of the bigger themes of the Galar region, the relationship between Pokemon and human society. Galar is portrayed as a region with stadium battles, big crowds, and a more modern culture, but it also has countryside roots, farms, and small towns. Nicket fits into that world as a Pokemon that lives on the edges of civilization. It's not fully wild in the sense of living deep in untouched forests. It lives near people, near roads, near farms, because that's where the food is. It's the kind of Pokemon that thrives in the gaps between human spaces, taking advantage of what people leave behind. One of the more obscure but factual details about Nickit is that its Pokédex entries emphasize how carefully it cleans up after itself. Some entries mention that it's very good at leaving no traces when it steals food, and that it even uses its tail to wipe away footprints. That's such a specific behavior that it makes Nickit feel like a real animal. In the real world, animals don't usually clean up intentionally, but they do behave in ways that reduce detection, like moving carefully and avoiding leaving strong scents. Pokemon takes that concept and makes it more dramatic, turning it into a defining trait. Nickit's role in Pokemon Sword and Shield also extends into the world of raids and overworld encounters. Unlike older Pokemon games where everything was random grass encounters, Sword and Shield allow you to see Pokemon walking around in the overworld. Nickit, when it appears, often feels like it's actually sneaking. It doesn't charge you like some Pokemon do. It moves cautiously, and if you're not paying attention, you can easily pass by it. That small gameplay detail reinforces the lore in a way that feels surprisingly immersive. Nickit also has a Gigantamax form? No, it does not. That's another interesting detail. Many Pokemon introduced in Generation 8 received Gigantamax forms, but Nickit and Thievul did not. That means Nickit remains a smaller, grounded Pokemon, not one designed for huge spectacle. In a region where stadium battles and giant Pokemon are the main theme, Nickit stays in its lane as a quiet thief on the sidelines. It's a Pokemon that doesn't belong in the spotlight, it belongs in the shadows. Nickit's connection to real fox behavior also makes it one of the more realistic Pokemon designs in terms of personality. Foxes are known for being adaptable, opportunistic, and clever. They live in many environments, including near cities. They scavenge food, and they can be surprisingly bold when humans aren't watching. Nickit takes all of that and translates it into Pokemon language, making it feel like a natural part of the world rather than a fantasy creature dropped in randomly. Another small but interesting fact is that Nickit's evolution level, 18, is relatively low, which means many players will have Thievul early in their journey. That gives the evolution line a different feel than Pokemon that evolve later. Nickit isn't meant to be a long-term baby form. It's meant to quickly become a more capable thief Pokemon. In a way, that fits the lore too. A young fox learns quickly. It doesn't stay helpless for long. It grows into its role fast. Nickit has also appeared in Pokemon Home and other modern Pokemon services, where its design is often appreciated by fans who like animal-like Pokemon. In recent generations, there's been a noticeable split in fan preference. Some people love the more humanoid, character-like Pokemon, while others prefer the more animalistic ones. Nickit sits firmly in the animalistic category. It looks like a creature you could imagine living in the wild, with just enough stylization to make it feel like Pokemon. In the Pokemon trading card game, Nickit cards tend to emphasize small damage, quick attacks, and sometimes stealing-themed effects, matching its identity. It isn't usually a centerpiece card, but it's often included as part of Thievul lines, and it's a Pokemon that feels consistent across different media. Whether you see it in the games, the anime, or the cards, Nickit is always the same kind of creature, sneaky, quick, and always looking for an easy meal. Nickit's type also gives it an interesting weakness profile. Dark types are weak to fighting, bug, and fairy. That means Nickit has natural predators in the Pokemon world. Fighting types represent strong, direct attackers. Bug types often represent swarming or surprising attacks. Fairy types, introduced later, represent a kind of magical purity that counters Dark's trickery. That balance makes Nickit feel like a creature that survives by avoiding battles rather than winning them. It's not built to take hits, it's built to not be there when the hit lands, and that might be the most accurate summary of Nickit's entire identity. Nickit is a Pokemon that exists in motion. It's always slipping away, always hiding, always finding a way to survive without being the strongest thing in the room. In a world filled with dragons, steel monsters, and legendary gods, Nickit survives by being small, quiet, and clever. So if you imagine walking through a Galar route at night, the air cool and still, the grass softly moving in the wind, you might not see Nickit at first. You might only notice a flicker of movement near the edge of the path, a small shape low to the ground watching you, and then, before you can even focus on it, it's gone. No footprints, no sound, just the feeling that something was there and decided you weren't worth the risk. There's something almost funny about how Slowking looks so relaxed while also being one of the smartest Pokemon in the entire series. It has the same sleepy, dopey vibe as Slowpoke and Slowbro. But then you notice the crown-like shelter clamped onto its head, the confident posture, and the way the Pokédex talks about it like it's some kind of ocean philosopher. Slowking is one of those Pokemon that feels like a joke at first glance, and then slowly turns into something surprisingly deep the more you learn about it. Slowking was introduced in Generation 2 in Pokemon Gold and Silver, and it's part of the Slowpoke evolution family, which is already famous for being unusual. Slowpoke is a water and psychic type Pokemon that evolves into Slowbro at level 37, but Slowking is a different path entirely. Instead of evolving through leveling, Slowpoke evolves into Slowking only by being traded while holding a King's Rock. That evolution method immediately makes Slowking feel special because it isn't just Slowpoke but stronger. It's Slowpoke transformed through a very specific, almost ceremonial process. The King's Rock itself is an interesting item to connect to this evolution. In the games, the King's Rock is typically associated with causing opponents to flinch, but its name gives it a regal feeling. When you combine a Slowpoke with a King's Rock, you get Slowking, a Pokemon whose name literally suggests royalty and intelligence. It's like the item isn't just a gameplay mechanic, but a symbolic crown, turning a slow, absent-minded creature into a kingly thinker. Slowking's typing is water and psychic, the same as Slowbro, and that combination has always been strong defensively. Water gives it resistance to fire, ice, steel, and water itself, while psychic adds resistance to fighting and psychic. Slowking's weaknesses include electric, grass, bug, ghost, and dark, which means it still has vulnerabilities, but overall it's a Pokemon designed to take hits and keep going. It isn't built to be fast. It's built to be calm and steady, like a creature that doesn't panic even when things get dangerous. One of the most famous parts of Slowking's lore is the way it gains intelligence. The Pokédex repeatedly states that Slowking becomes intelligent because the shelter biting its head injects toxins that stimulate its brain. That is such a strange concept, because it turns evolution into something almost accidental. Slowpoke doesn't evolve into Slowking because it trained hard or reached a certain age. It evolves because a shelter clamps onto its head in a specific way, triggering a transformation that changes its mind as much as its body. This is where Slowking becomes one of the most unique Pokemon in the franchise. Most Pokemon evolutions are physical upgrades: bigger muscles, sharper claws, stronger fire, harder armor. Slowking's evolution is partly mental. It's described as becoming able to understand human speech, to think deeply, and to solve complex problems. Some Pokédex entries even suggest that Slowking can make plans and strategies that other Pokemon cannot, It's not just stronger, it's wiser. But what makes this even more interesting is that Slowking's intelligence isn't permanent in the way you might expect. Some Pokédex entries mention that if the shelter on its head is removed, Slowking will revert to being a normal Slowpoke again. That detail makes Slowking feel less like a natural final evolution and more like a temporary state, like a magical crown that grants wisdom as long as it remains in place. It's almost like a fantasy story, where the king is only wise because of the artifact on his head, and without it, he becomes ordinary again. Slowking's design reinforces that idea. The shelter on its head looks like a crown with spikes and a red gem-like shape. It's not the same shelter design as the one on Slowbro's tail, and that's important. Slowbro's shelter bites its tail, which is why Slowbro is often associated with physical strength and defense. Slowking's shelter bites its head, which is why Slowking is associated with intelligence and strategy. The same basic creature, shelter, can trigger different outcomes depending on where it attaches. That's a brilliant bit of design logic, because it makes the Slowpoke line feel like a natural biological mystery rather than a simple evolution ladder. Slowking also has one of the most memorable anime appearances of any Johto Pokemon, because it was given a personality unlike almost any other Pokemon. In Pokemon, the movie 2000, a Slowking appears as a wise speaking Pokemon that acts like a leader and translator. It communicates with humans, it makes decisions, and it feels almost like an ancient guardian. That portrayal stuck with a lot of fans because it made Slowking feel less like a normal Pokemon and more like a mythic figure, like the kind of creature that could exist in hidden temples near the sea. That movie portrayal isn't the only time Slowking has been treated as special. In the games, Slowking is often associated with wisdom and leadership in its Pokédex entries. Some entries describe it as being able to create medicine by mixing ingredients in its mouth. Others describe it as being able to solve problems instantly, but then forgetting what it was thinking about when distracted. That last detail is one of the most charming parts of Slowking's lore. It suggests that even though it becomes intelligent, it still has a slow, wandering mind. It can have brilliant thoughts, but it can also lose them like a dream fading when you wake up. Slowking's name is also one of those Pokemon names that tells you exactly what it is. Slow for its Slowpoke origin, and King for its regal intelligence. In Japanese, Slowking's name is Yadoking, combining Yadon, the Japanese name for Slowpoke, with King. That consistency across languages reinforces that the concept of Slowking as a crowned Slowpoke was central from the start. In battle, Slowking has traditionally been more specially oriented than Slowbro. While Slowbro is often associated with physical defense, Slowking tends to have stronger special defense. This makes them feel like two different roles. Slowbro as the sturdy wall that can take physical hits, Slowking as the calm strategist that can absorb special attacks. They share the same typing, but they play differently, which makes the evolution split feel meaningful rather than cosmetic. Slowking's abilities also help define its role. One of its classic abilities is Own Tempo, which prevents it from becoming confused. That fits Slowking perfectly, because confusion is often portrayed as a loss of mental clarity, and Slowking is meant to be mentally stable and wise. It also can have Oblivious, which prevents it from being infatuated, and in some later mechanics prevents Taunt, reflecting the idea that Slowking is too calm and detached to be distracted by emotional tricks. Both abilities reinforce the theme that Slowking's mind is its greatest strength. Slowking's hidden ability is Regenerator, which is one of the most powerful defensive abilities in the game. Regenerator restores a portion of Slowking's health when it switches out of battle. This makes Slowking incredibly effective in long battles, because it can take hits, retreat, heal, and return again. Thematically, Regenerator fits Slowking like a creature that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, and doesn't need to win quickly. It can outlast opponents through patience and recovery, like a wise king waiting out the storm. One obscure but fascinating fact about Slowking is that it has a regional form in the Galar region. Galarian Slowking was introduced in Pokemon Sword and Shield's expansion content, and it completely changes the vibe of the Pokemon. Instead of being water, psychic, Galarian Slowking is poison, psychic, and its Shelder crown becomes more like a strange, toxic helmet. The lore describes it as having developed in a different environment, with the Shelder's toxins changing the evolution outcome. This is one of the best examples of regional forms making Pokemon biology feel real. The same species evolves differently because of the local conditions, creating a new type and a new identity. Galarian Slowking also leans into the idea of Slowking as a researcher or alchemist. Its design looks like a Pokemon that experiments with toxins and potions, and its Pokédex entries emphasize its strange chemical intelligence. That regional form made Slowking feel relevant again in modern Pokemon, not just as a nostalgic Johto Pokemon, but as a concept that can evolve and adapt across generations. Slowking's relationship with the King's Rock is also interesting historically, because the King's Rock was introduced in Generation 2, along with several other evolution items that expanded the idea of how Pokemon could evolve. Before that, evolution was mostly leveling, stones, or trading. Generation 2 introduced held item evolutions, making the process feel more complex and more connected to the world. Slowking is one of the most iconic examples of that system, and it helped set the stage for many future evolutions that required held items and trades. In the Pokemon trading card game, Slowking has had multiple interesting card effects over the years, often themed around disruption and strategy. Some Slowking cards have been known for slowing down opponents or interfering with their plans, which fits its identity as a clever, calculating Pokemon. Even outside the main games, Slowking is often portrayed as a thinker rather than a fighter. Another subtle detail about Slowking is how it fits into the royalty theme that appears throughout Pokemon. There are Pokemon like Nidoking, Seaking, Kingler, and even Kingambit in later generations, all using King as part of their identity. But Slowking's King isn't about brute dominance. It's about wisdom. That makes it stand out among king-themed Pokemon because it suggests a different kind of power, the power of thought. Slowking is also a Pokemon that encourages players to think differently about evolution. It's not always about becoming bigger or more aggressive. Sometimes it's about becoming smarter. Sometimes it's about changing roles. Slowpoke can become a physically defensive Slowbro or a specially defensive Slowking. It's like the Pokemon world acknowledging that growth can take different paths depending on circumstances. And when you picture Slowking in its natural habitat, it's easy to imagine it sitting near the edge of the sea, half submerged in calm water, eyes half-lidded, thinking about something impossibly complex while the waves gently move around it. It doesn't need to rush. It doesn't need to chase. It doesn't need to prove anything. It's simply there, existing in its own slow rhythm, with a crown on its head that grants it wisdom. And maybe, if it's distracted for just a moment, it forgets the thought entirely, returning to quiet stillness like nothing ever mattered more than the sound of the ocean. If you've ever seen Sunflora standing in the grass with its little sunflower face turned toward the sky, it's hard not to feel like it belongs in a peaceful garden more than in a battlefield. Sunflora is one of those Pokemon that looks like it should be gently swaying in the breeze, soaking up sunlight, living a simple life where the biggest decision of the day is which direction to face. And in a way, that's exactly what Sunflora is. It's a grass-type Pokemon that embodies the idea of living by the rhythm of the sun, thriving when the world is warm and bright, and struggling when the light fades. Sunflora was introduced in Generation 2 in Pokemon Gold and Silver, and it evolves from Sunkern using a Sunstone. That evolution method is already a clue to its identity. The Sunstone is a special evolution item associated with sunlight, warmth, and plant life, and Sunflora is one of the most literal evolutions tied to that theme. Sunkern is often described as the weakest Pokemon in terms of base stats, famously fragile and small. But with the right stone, it becomes Sunflora, a Pokemon that looks far more confident and complete, like a seed finally becoming a full bloom. Sunflora's name is a blend of sun and flora, meaning plant life. It's one of those names that's extremely straightforward, but it fits perfectly. In Japanese, Sunflora's name is Kimawari, which means sunflower. Again, the concept is crystal clear. This Pokemon is a living sunflower. One of the most consistent facts about Sunflora in the Pokédex is that it follows the sun. Multiple entries describe Sunflora moving during the day by turning its flower face towards sunlight, absorbing energy through photosynthesis. This is directly inspired by real sunflowers, which exhibit a behavior called heliotropism, where young sunflowers track the sun's movement across the sky. Pokemon takes that real-world concept and turns it into a defining trait of Sunflora's species. It doesn't just like sunlight, it depends on it. In fact, some Pokédex entries mention that Sunflora becomes sluggish or inactive when it's cloudy or raining. That's such a simple detail, but it makes Sunflora feel incredibly believable as a plant creature. It isn't an animal that can run around no matter what. It's a living flower, and its energy levels are tied to the weather. In a world full of Pokemon that can shoot fire or summon lightning, Sunflora is a reminder that some creatures live by simpler rules. Light equals energy, darkness equals rest. Sunflora is a pure grass-type Pokemon, which gives it a classic set of strengths and weaknesses. It resists water, electric, grass, and ground, but it's weak to fire, ice, flying, bug, and poison. That's a lot of weaknesses, and it's part of why Sunflora has often been seen as a weaker Pokemon in battle. But what makes Sunflora interesting isn't that it's a competitive powerhouse. It's that it has such a clear theme and personality. It's a Pokemon that feels like it belongs in the world, even if it isn't dominating battles. Sunflora's stats reflect its identity too. It tends to have higher special attack than physical power, which makes sense because it's a plant Pokemon that attacks with energy-based moves rather than brute force. Sunflora isn't going to punch or tackle like a fighting Pokemon. It's going to fire beams of sunlight, release spores, or drain energy from opponents. That's how it fights, like a plant using nature's tools. One of Sunflora's most iconic moves is Solar Beam. Solar Beam is one of the most famous grass-type attacks in the entire franchise, requiring a charging turn to gather sunlight before unleashing a powerful blast. Sunflora using Solar Beam feels perfectly natural because it's literally a Pokemon built around absorbing sunlight. It's like Solar Beam is its signature expression of what it is, a living solar panel that can turn sunlight into raw force. Sunflora also has a strong association with the move Sunny Day, which changes the weather to harsh sunlight. This is another move that fits Sunflora beautifully. Sunflora thrives in sunlight, so creating sunlight is like creating its ideal environment. In battle, Sunny Day boosts fire-type moves and weakens water-type moves, but it also powers up certain abilities and moves that depend on sunlight. Sunflora can take advantage of this by boosting Solar Beam so it doesn't need to charge, allowing it to fire instantly. That combo is one of the classic Sun team strategies, and Sunflora's very existence feels like it was designed for that kind of playstyle. Sunflora's abilities also connect to sunlight. One of its common abilities is chlorophyll, which doubles its speed stat in harsh sunlight. This ability is famous for turning normally slow grass types into fast threats when the sun is shining. For Sunflora, chlorophyll makes perfect thematic sense. When the sun is out, Sunflora becomes energized and active. When the sun is gone, it slows down again. It's like its entire body is powered by solar energy. Sunflora can also have the ability Solar Power in later games, which increases its special attack in harsh sunlight, but causes it to lose some HP each turn. That ability is extremely fitting, because it represents the idea of pushing itself too hard under the sun, like absorbing so much energy that it becomes damaging. It's a cool concept. Sunlight gives power, but too much power has a cost. One obscure and fascinating fact about Sunflora is its role in Johto's Goldenrod City. In Pokemon Gold, Silver, and Crystal, there's a small side quest involving a squirmy tree Pokemon blocking the road. That Pokemon turns out to be Sudowoodo, but the item needed to reveal it is the squirt bottle, which you receive after helping Whitney. Sunflora isn't directly involved in that event, but it is tied to the general theme of plant-like Pokemon and the idea of nature blending into the environment. Johto's design is full of these little moments where Pokemon feel like part of the landscape, and Sunflora fits that vibe. Sunflora is also tied to one of the most charming side locations in Johto, the national park and the surrounding countryside routes where plant Pokemon are common. In Johto, the world feels more rural and natural than Kanto in many ways, and Sunflora feels like it belongs there. It's a Pokemon you could imagine growing near farms, gardens, and sunny fields, quietly living alongside humans without causing trouble. In Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Sunflora appears as a character in some games, and it's often portrayed as cheerful and optimistic, which fits its sunny theme. Sunflora's face naturally looks like it's smiling, and its bright petals give it a friendly appearance. It's the kind of Pokemon that seems like it would brighten a room just by being there, like a living flower arrangement with a personality. Sunflora's design is also interesting because it's not a complicated plant monster. Some grass types are covered in vines, thorns, or armor-like bark. Sunflora is simple. It has a round sunflower head, a green body, and leaf-like arms. That simplicity makes it feel like a classic Pokemon design, almost like something that could have existed in Generation 1. In fact, Sunkern and Sunflora were introduced in Generation 2, but they feel like they could have been part of the earliest Pokédex because they're so straightforward and recognizable. Another fun fact about Sunflora is that it has appeared in multiple Pokemon spin-off games and media as a symbol of sunshine and positivity. Because its design is so friendly, it's often used in cheerful scenes, gardens, or peaceful areas. It's not the kind of Pokemon that gets used to represent danger, it's used to represent warmth. But Sunflora does have a slightly sad side too, if you read its Pokédex entries carefully. Some entries mention that it can wither or become weak if it doesn't get enough sunlight. That's a real plant-like vulnerability. Sunflora isn't just happy all the time, it's dependent. It needs the sun, and that dependence makes it feel more alive because it has needs beyond battle. Sunflora's evolutionary line also carries an interesting message about transformation. Sunkern is famously weak, often cited as one of the weakest Pokemon ever in terms of stats. But it evolves into Sunflora, which is stronger and more capable. It's like a reminder that even something small and fragile can become something brighter and more confident with the right conditions. It's a very gentle kind of evolution story, Not about becoming a fierce warrior, but about blooming. In the Pokemon world, Sunflora would probably be a Pokemon that people keep in gardens and greenhouses. It would be useful for agriculture, helping plants grow, providing warmth, and maybe even acting as a natural source of light. If it can absorb sunlight and store it, it might be able to release that energy in subtle ways. Pokemon doesn't always explore those everyday uses deeply, but Sunflora's design makes it easy to imagine. Sunflora's presence in later generations also shows how Pokemon designs can remain consistent even as the world changes. Even as Pokemon games introduced more complex creatures, more detailed models, and more dramatic lore, Sunflora stayed Sunflora, a sunflower Pokemon that follows the sun, a simple idea executed clearly. It's like a little piece of the franchise's early charm preserved through the years. And when you picture Sunflora at night, it becomes even more peaceful. The sun is gone, the petals are still, and the world is quiet. Sunflora doesn't need to move. It doesn't need to chase anything. It can simply rest, waiting for the next sunrise. In that way, Sunflora feels like one of the most naturally sleepy Pokemon concepts. It lives by daylight, and when the daylight ends, it slows down, like the world itself telling it gently that it's time to be still. So if you imagine a wide field in the Johto countryside, warm grass underfoot, a soft breeze moving through the plants, and Sunflora standing among them like little suns planted into the earth, it feels like the simplest kind of comfort, a reminder that some things in the Pokemon world aren't about power or battles at all. Some things are just about growing, turning toward the light, and blooming quietly, one sunrise at a time. In the Pokemon world, not every creature is born in a forest or hatched in a quiet nest somewhere out in the wild. Some Pokemon feel like they were created by the world itself, by what people leave behind. Grimer is one of the clearest examples of that idea. It isn't a cute animal or a mythical guardian. It's living sludge, a pile of toxic pollution that somehow gained a heartbeat, a mind, and the ability to move around like a creature with its own instincts. Grimer was introduced all the way back in Generation 1 in Pokemon Red and Blue, and it has been one of the franchise's most memorable gross Pokemon ever since. It's a pure poison-type Pokemon, and it evolves into Muck at level 38. That's a fairly late evolution level compared to many early Pokemon, which means Grimer is meant to spend a decent amount of time as its basic form. And honestly, it fits. Grimer doesn't feel like a baby Pokemon. It feels like a problem, like something you encounter in a place you shouldn't be walking around in the first place. Grimer's design is deceptively simple. It's basically a purple sludge blob with 2 arms and a wide, almost goofy face. Its eyes are uneven, its mouth is stretched into a grin, and it looks like it's always half melting. But despite the simplicity, the design communicates exactly what Grimer is. It's unstable. It's messy. It's the kind of creature that doesn't have a solid shape because it's made of liquid and waste. One of the most important factual details about Grimer is its origin story in the Pokédex. Many Pokédex entries describe Grimer as being born from sludge in polluted areas, especially places like factories, sewers, or contaminated waterways. This makes Grimer one of the most environmentally themed Pokemon in the series. It isn't just a poison monster, it's literally the physical manifestation of pollution becoming alive. In the Kanto region, Grimer is famously associated with places like the Celadon City sewers or the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island in some versions, but its most iconic connection is with industrial waste and urban pollution. In early Pokemon games, where most Pokemon live in grass and caves, Grimer feels like an anomaly. It exists in the places humans have damaged. It's like the Pokemon world responding to pollution by creating a species that thrives in it. Grimer's name is another one of those names that's perfectly blunt. Grime is dirt and filth, and Grimer is literally made of it. In Japanese, Grimer is called betbetter, which is an onomatopoeia for sticky, gooey sludge. That's such a sensory name. It sounds like something wet and unpleasant, and that fits Grimer perfectly. Grimer's Pokédex lore gets even more intense when it describes the smell. Multiple entries say Grimer smells horrible, and that touching it can leave a toxic residue. Some entries describe it as leaving a trail of poison wherever it moves, and that plants die where it passes. That's an important detail because it makes Grimer feel less like a silly blob and more like a genuine hazard. It isn't just gross to look at, it actively harms the environment around it. That environmental effect becomes a core part of Grimer's identity. Grimer isn't just a creature living in pollution, it spreads pollution. It's like a walking contamination event. In a realistic ecosystem, something like Grimer would be terrifying because it could ruin farmland, poison rivers, and destroy habitats just by existing. But at the same time, the Pokemon world often frames Grimer in a strangely neutral way. It isn't portrayed as evil. It's portrayed as a creature doing what it naturally does. It's like a wild animal that happens to be made of toxic waste. That's what makes Grimer fascinating. It's not malicious, it's a symptom. Grimer's typing as pure poison is also historically interesting. In Generation 1, poison was one of the most common types in the game, and many early Pokemon were poison type or part poison type. But Grimer stands out because it's poison in the most literal way possible. It isn't a plant with poison spores or a snake with venom. It's poison itself. In battle, Grimer and Mook have often been known for being bulky, with high HP and decent attack. They aren't usually fast. They aren't usually elegant. They're tanks. They absorb hits and wear opponents down. That fits their theme perfectly. Sludge doesn't move quickly, it spreads slowly, but it doesn't stop. One of Grimer's most iconic moves is Sludge, and later, Sludge Bomb. These moves became staples of poison-type Pokemon, and Muck in particular is famous for using them. Sludge Bomb is one of the strongest and most reliable poison-type attacks in the series, and it has a chance to poison the opponent. The move itself is basically Grimer's body turned into a weapon. It's not using claws or teeth, it's using what it is. Grimer also learns moves like Minimize, which is a weirdly fitting move for a sludge Pokemon. Minimize allows the Pokemon to shrink down and become harder to hit. For Grimer, it makes sense because sludge can compress, spread out, and change shape. It can flatten itself, slip through cracks, or become smaller and denser. That's not just a gameplay mechanic. It's consistent with the idea that Grimer isn't a solid creature. Grimer also has access to moves like Acid Armor, which raises its defense by melting and hardening its body. Again, that fits perfectly. It can change consistency, becoming thicker and more resistant to physical attacks. Grimer's moveset often feels like a chemistry experiment, with acids, sludge, and toxic reactions. Grimer's abilities also reinforce its toxic nature. One of its common abilities is Stench, which can cause opponents to flinch. That's such a funny ability conceptually, but it makes sense. Grimer smells so bad that it disrupts opponents. Another ability is Sticky Hold, which prevents its held item from being taken. Sticky Hold is extremely fitting because Grimer is literally sticky sludge. Good luck trying to steal something from it when everything sticks to it anyway. Grimer's hidden ability is Poison Touch, which gives it a chance to poison opponents when it makes physical contact. That ability is one of the most accurate representations of what Grimer would be like in the real world. If you touch toxic sludge, you're going to get contaminated. Poison touch makes that idea part of its battle identity. One of the most interesting and obscure facts about Grimer is that it has a regional form in Alola. Alolan Grimer and Alolan Muck were introduced in Generation 7, and they completely changed how people viewed the Pokemon. Instead of being plain purple sludge, Alolan Grimer has a more colorful, oily appearance, and Alolan Muck looks like a rainbow oil spill with toxic stripes. This form is poison and dark type instead of pure poison. The lore behind Alolan Grimer is that it adapted to a different kind of pollution. In the Alola region, Grimer were brought in to deal with garbage problems, and they developed a taste for trash. Over time, their bodies changed, becoming more stable and crystalline in some ways, but also more chemically complex. Alolan Muck's body is described as containing toxins that form in layers, creating that strange rainbow sheen. It's a perfect reference to real oil slicks and chemical waste patterns. Alolan Grimer's design also includes little teeth-like shapes and a more mischievous look, which fits the addition of the dark type. It's not just toxic, it's sneaky and aggressive in a different way. And one of the coolest details is that Alolan Muck's toxins are so dangerous that it has to keep them contained inside its body, almost like it's carrying a chemical weapon inside itself at all times. Grimer's relationship with human society in the Pokemon world is also a fascinating theme. In many Pokemon stories, humans and Pokemon live in harmony, but Grimer is a reminder that harmony doesn't mean perfection. Humans create waste, and Pokemon like Grimer exist because of it. In some ways, Grimer is like a warning sign. It's the Pokemon world saying, if you pollute enough, nature will respond, and it might not respond in a way you like. And yet, Grimer can still be caught, trained, and bonded with. Trainers can raise Grimer into Muck, and Muck can become a loyal teammate. That's one of the most interesting contradictions in Pokemon. Even the grossest, most toxic creatures can become companions. It's like the franchise refusing to label any Pokemon as unlovable, no matter how disgusting it seems. In the anime, Grimer and Muck often appear as comedic characters, especially because Muck has a habit of hugging people and covering them in sludge. That running gag is famous, particularly with characters like Professor Oak being tackled by Muck. It's gross, but it's also weirdly affectionate. Muck doesn't mean harm in those scenes. It's just expressing love the only way it knows how, by smothering someone in toxic goo. That contrast between danger and affection is part of what makes Grimer's line so memorable. Grimer's role in the Pokemon ecosystem also raises interesting questions. If Grimer is born from pollution, does that mean it helps clean it up, or does it make it worse? The Pokédex often suggests it makes it worse by spreading poison, but Alolan Grimer's lore suggests it can actually be used to deal with waste problems. That means Grimer might have a dual role depending on environment. In some places, it's a symptom of pollution. In others, it's a solution, eating trash and breaking it down, even if the result is still toxic. Grimer's biology is also strange when you think about it. It's a poison type, but it doesn't have organs in the way animals do. It's sludge. So how does it think? How does it move? Pokemon doesn't answer those questions directly, but it hints that Grimer is a chemical life form held together by toxins and reactions. It might move because of internal chemical shifts, like a living reaction mass. That's a genuinely sci-fi concept hidden inside a simple purple blob. Another obscure detail is that Grimer's body can absorb things into itself. In some Pokédex entries, it's described as consuming waste and incorporating it. That means Grimer isn't just a blob. It's a living container, a moving chemical pit that can swallow objects and break them down. That's horrifying if you think too hard about it, but also kind of fascinating. And for all its toxicity and grossness, Grimer has a strange charm. It smiles, it looks goofy, it's not trying to scare you, it's just existing. It's the kind of Pokemon that reminds you the world isn't only made of cute animals and heroic dragons. It's also made of the messy parts, the leftovers, the sludge at the bottom of a drain, the things nobody wants to think about. So when you imagine Grimer late at night, maybe in a quiet abandoned factory, the air heavy and still, puddles reflecting dim light, you can picture it slowly oozing along the floor, not rushing, not hunting, just moving, leaving a faint trail behind it, like the world's pollution given shape. And in that strange, sleepy way, Grimer becomes a reminder that even the ugliest parts of a world can become living stories. Even the sludge can have a name, a face, and a place in the Pokédex. You can almost hear the sound of dry sand shifting when you think about Sandslash, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in that quiet desert way where every movement feels softened by dust and distance. Sandslash is one of those Pokemon that has always felt dependable, like it belongs to the steady, unglamorous side of the Pokemon world. It doesn't have glowing wings or cosmic lore. It's a ground-type creature built for survival, defense, and digging its way through harsh environments, and it's been part of the franchise since the very beginning. Sandslash was introduced in Generation 1 in Pokemon Red and Blue, and it evolves from Sandshrew using a Moonstone. That evolution method is already a little interesting, because the Moonstone is more commonly associated with Pokemon that feel mysterious or lunar-themed, like Clefairy or Nidorina. Sandshrew evolving with a Moonstone feels less mythic and more like a gameplay choice to make Sandslash accessible. But it also adds a strange flavor to the evolution line, like Sandslash is something that awakens under moonlight, becoming tougher and more battle-ready once that stone's energy triggers the change. Sandslash is a pure ground-type Pokemon in its original form, which means it has one of the most iconic defensive traits in the series, immunity to electric-type moves. That alone has made ground types valuable since Generation 1, because electric moves are powerful and common. Sandslash can walk into a Thunderbolt like it's nothing. It doesn't even react. That's one of those small mechanical details that makes ground-type Pokemon feel like they have a built-in advantage in certain matchups, like they're naturally grounded in the literal sense. But ground types also have weaknesses that keep them balanced. Sandslash is weak to water, grass, and ice. That's important because Sandslash often lives in dry environments where water might be rare, but when water does show up, it's dangerous. In the Pokemon world, it's like Sandslash is built for deserts and caves, not lakes and rivers. It thrives where the ground is hard and dry. It struggles where the ground becomes mud or ice. Sandslash's design is based on animals like pangolins and armadillos, creatures known for their protective armor and digging abilities. The resemblance is obvious in Sandslash's spiky back and curled posture. It looks like a creature that can roll up into a ball, and in fact, that's exactly how many Pokédex entries describe its defensive behavior. Sandslash can curl into a tight ball, using its hardened spines as protection, making it difficult for predators to harm it. Those spines are one of Sandslash's defining traits. They aren't just decoration. The Pokédex often describes them as sharp and hard enough to damage attackers. Some entries mention that its spines can break off and grow back, similar to how certain animals can regenerate parts of their bodies. That detail adds a layer of realism. Sandslash isn't just armored, it's designed to survive repeated conflict, able to repair itself over time. Another fascinating detail is that Sandslash is known for digging, It can burrow into the ground quickly, creating tunnels and hiding from danger. This isn't just a lore detail either. In battle, Sandslash often learns moves like Dig, which allows it to disappear underground for a turn and then strike from below. Dig is one of the most iconic ground-type moves, and Sandslash using it feels perfectly natural. It's not just using a move because it's in the move pool, it's using a move because it's what it was built to do. Sandslash's digging behavior also connects to how it lives in the wild. Many Pokédex entries describe it making deep burrows to protect itself from heat and predators. This is similar to real desert animals, which often dig underground to escape the intense daytime temperatures. Sandslash feels like it belongs in that ecosystem. It's not a Pokemon that would be comfortable standing out in the open all day. It's a Pokemon that survives by controlling its environment, hiding when it needs to, and emerging when it's safe. Sandslash's name is also simple and effective. Sand for its habitat, and Slash for its fighting style. Sandslash doesn't shoot beams or summon storms. It slashes. It uses claws and physical strength. Its Japanese name, Sandpan, combines sand and pangolin, reinforcing its animal inspiration. In Generation 1, Sandslash was a version-exclusive evolution line. Sandshrew and Sandslash were exclusive to Pokemon Blue, while Ekans and Arbok were exclusive to Pokemon Red. That made Sandslash feel special to players who chose Blue, because it was one of the Pokemon that defined that version's identity. Version exclusives were a core part of Pokemon's early design philosophy, encouraging trading between players. Sandslash being one of those exclusives made it more memorable, because it wasn't something every player could easily get on their own. Sandslash also has an interesting competitive history. It has never been considered one of the absolute top-tier ground types, but it has often been valued for its physical defense and access to certain utility moves. In earlier generations, Sandslash could use moves like Swords Dance, boosting its attack sharply and turning it into a dangerous physical sweeper. Swords Dance is one of those moves that can completely change a Pokemon's role. A defensive Pokemon can suddenly become an offensive threat. Sandslash is a great example of that. It looks like a tank, but with the right setup, it can become a blade. Sandslash has also been known for learning moves like Earthquake, one of the most powerful and reliable ground-type attacks in the series. Earthquake is a move that almost defines ground types, and Sandslash using it fits perfectly. It's like it's shaking the earth itself, using its connection to the ground as a weapon. Earthquake has always been a move that feels heavy and serious, and Sandslash's sturdy, physical design matches that weight. Another move Sandslash is often associated with is Sandstorm, the weather move that creates a raging sandstorm on the battlefield. Sandstorm damages most Pokemon each turn except for rock, ground, and steel types. Sandslash being able to function well in sandstorm conditions makes sense thematically. It's a sand creature. It should be comfortable in sand. In some competitive formats, sand teams have been built around Pokemon that benefit from Sandstorm, and while Sandslash isn't always the star of those teams, it fits naturally into that environment. Sandslash's abilities have changed across generations, and that's another interesting factual detail. In its earlier forms, Sandslash often had the ability Sandveil, which increases its evasion during a sandstorm. Sandveil fits Sandslash perfectly. In a sandstorm, visibility is low, and a creature adapted to sand would naturally be harder to track. It's like Sandslash becomes a ghost in the dust, slipping through the storm while opponents struggle to see. Later, Sandslash also gained access to the ability Sand Rush, especially in its Alolan form, which doubles its speed in a sandstorm. That ability turns Sandslash into a completely different kind of Pokemon, fast and aggressive under the right conditions. Sand Rush is one of the strongest weather-based abilities in the game because speed control is so important. When Sandslash is fast, it can take advantage of its strong physical moves and become a real threat. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating facts about Sandslash. It has a regional form. Alolan Sandslash was introduced in Generation 7, and it completely flips the concept of the Pokemon. Instead of being a desert ground type, Alolan Sandslash is an ice and steel type Pokemon. That typing is wild when you think about it. It turns a sand burrower into a snow and ice survivor, and it changes its design from sandy spikes to icy quills. Alolan Sandslash is said to have adapted to the snowy mountains of Alola. Instead of digging through sand, it digs through snow. Instead of being vulnerable to ice-type moves, it becomes ice-type itself. That's one of the most satisfying examples of Pokemon adaptation. The same basic creature evolves differently because the environment demands it. The world changes, so the Pokemon changes. Alolan Sandslash's steel typing also gives it a very different defensive profile. Steel is one of the best defensive types in Pokemon, resisting many attacks. But ice adds weaknesses too, including fire and fighting. Alolan Sandslash becomes a Pokemon that feels like a frozen, armored warrior, sliding across ice, cutting through snowstorms like a blade. Its design also changes to match that identity. Alolan Sandslash looks sharper, more angular, almost like it's wearing an icy suit of armor. The spikes on its back become icicles, and its claws look more like blades. It's still clearly Sandslash, but it's Sandslash in a different world. In the Pokemon anime, Sandslash has often been portrayed as a tough, reliable battler. It's not usually shown as a goofy or playful Pokemon. It's serious. It fights with discipline. That matches its design because Sandslash looks like it's always ready to defend itself. It's a Pokemon that doesn't look like it wants trouble, but it's fully prepared if trouble comes. Sandslash also has one of those subtle Pokédex details that makes it feel more real. It's described as avoiding water. Some entries mention that it doesn't like getting wet because water can soften the ground and make digging harder, or because its body isn't suited for moisture. That's a realistic trait for a desert-adapted creature. Many real desert animals avoid water not because they don't need it, but because their bodies and habits are tuned for dry conditions. Sandslash fits that perfectly. Another obscure detail is that Sandslash's claws are described as being able to tear through hard ground and even cut through rock. That's impressive, because it suggests Sandslash is not just a digger, but a powerful excavator. In a Pokemon world, Sandslash could probably create tunnels quickly, escape danger instantly, and even shape terrain. It's the kind of Pokemon that would be extremely useful for humans in construction or mining if they could work with it safely. Sandslash's evolution method also makes it one of those Pokemon that players often evolve early. Moonstones are obtainable fairly early in many games, and once you have one, you can evolve Sandshrew immediately. That means many players might have a Sandslash far earlier than the level curve expects, but evolving early comes with a trade-off. In many Pokemon games, evolved Pokemon learn certain moves later than their unevolved forms, so a player who evolves Sandshrew too early might miss out on some moves learned at lower stages. That creates a small strategic choice. Do you evolve now for better stats, or wait for better moves? Sandslash is part of that classic Pokemon decision-making. Sandslash also has a presence in Pokemon merchandise and fan art because its design is iconic. It's one of those Generation 1 Pokemon that people instantly recognize. The spiky silhouette, the clawed hands, the armored back, It's unmistakable. Even if someone hasn't played Pokemon in years, Sandslash often triggers that memory of early routes, version exclusives, and digging through caves. And maybe the most comforting thing about Sandslash is how grounded it feels in every sense of the word. It's literally a ground type, but it's also emotionally grounded. It doesn't feel dramatic, it feels practical. It feels like a Pokemon that survives through patience, defense, and steady strength. It's the kind of Pokemon that doesn't need attention to be valuable, it just works. So if you imagine a quiet desert at night, the sand cooling after a long day of heat, the stars bright overhead, and the wind moving gently across the dunes, you might picture Sandslash emerging from its burrow. Not in a rush, just stepping out, checking the air, listening for danger, and then moving across the sand with that steady confidence. A creature built for harsh environments, living calmly in the silence, carrying its armor like it was born with it because it was.